do want to go ahead and start this October 21st meeting of the Lawrence Alliance for Education. And just as a reminder, in accordance with the Governor's executive order in March, we are holding this meeting remote. So all board members and staff are participating remote. We do provide access through Facebook Live for the public to view the meeting. So first order of business, I'd like just to stand and recite the pledge, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Great. So thank you all. Again, we are holding this meeting remote, and in large part that is because as we'll hear, and I'm sure you all know, the district is operating pretty much remote currently in response to just the ongoing red status of Lawrence. And so the superintendent will talk about it, but given that the buildings for the most part are closed, I just didn't feel like it made sense to ask staff to then go into a building just to open up for this meeting, given that we have the technology both to have this meeting and then to ensure access to the public. So we have an agenda today that we'll go through, that we'll get a lot of sort of updates on some of the things that we've asked for, including facilities and sort of how the remote learning is going. We'll have a budget update. I just want to note something. So thank you. I have received the evaluation for the superintendent from board members. So just to be clear on the process, I will be compiling all of those individual evaluations, sending it to you all by early next week. I want to make sure you have time to review and let me know if you have any changes you'd like to make. And then at our next meeting, we'll be both discussing and voting on the evaluation for last school year for the superintendent. We'll also have an executive session during that meeting to actually speak about the superintendent's compensation, which is one of the reasons that legally we're allowed to go into executive session. So that will all happen next meeting. I know I had asked for the executive session to be set up for this meeting, but that will not be happening. We'll be doing that instead during our next meeting. So, all right, Superintendent, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So tonight we have a few updates for you, including a finance update. So I'm going to let my colleague, Maciel Jordan, our CFO, take it over from here.
Hi, everyone. You should have received a memo from me detailing for you where we are today. As of September 30th, we have about 22.5% of our budget encumbered. You will note that there were 0 payments in regular ed transportation paid, which is in line with the fact that we don't have students currently going into the building. We do have some special ed transportation happening, which is why you see a small amount in that line expended. Payroll will be encumbered at some point between this month and next month as hiring and some of the leaves settle out. And then I'd actually like to bring your attention to a slide that I have prepared for you today. Sure, Jess.
If you were screen sharing a moment ago, but whatever document had up disappeared.
Sure, I think it's probably going to pop up again now.
Oh, okay.
That's regarding the grant spending, which is where I'm moving on to at this point.
And Maciel, I just want to clarify, and I could just be exposing my own self, but I didn't see a memo in the board link.
Oh,
in the packet. Was that sent separately? Did I miss that?
Oh, I apologize for that because that should have been included. I can do a screen share of that now if necessary, though.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind walking it through, though, just because board members have not seen it. So thank you for preparing it, but we haven't seen it. So
absolutely. So I can definitely share that with you now. If I can get permission to share my screen, and I'll actually walk you through the information on it. If you haven't seen it, then it makes total sense for me to walk you through the entire.
Appreciate it.
Absolutely. So my apologies for that. is the memo that you will receive shortly. So I'll make sure you guys get this after this meeting. And it's just detailing out what our expenses are between salaries and expenses. So our total budget for right now is the 200 million. We need to go back to council for the additional appropriation after the budget was finalized, which has not happened yet. So once that happens, there will be an update done in Munis with the additional funding that was done for the final budget. But for now, this is what we have, and we have appropriated about 22.5%, which is leaves us with about 172 million still available. You will see that we have encumbered based off of the plans that were the transportation encumbrances happened based off of us planning on going hybrid back in July, which we all know a lot of things have happened since then. So those encumbrances have not changed because there is anticipated expense in transportation at some point this year, we hope. So that's why I wanted to bring to your attention the $0 expended in regular ed transportation, and then a small amount of special ed transportation that is still being paid for. And then out of district tuition is still being processed by the special ed department as normal. Is there anything else you guys would like me to highlight off of this before I move on to grants?
Can you say again how much needs to be sent to the council for appropriation?
I have to work through the final number with Mark before I can tell you what that final number is.
Okay.
And then I'll be sure to give you an updated memo, Mayor, before we get on council. And I'll provide an updated information for the board as well.
Let me, just before we move on, and thank you, appreciate that. Let me just go through the board members and see if they have any questions just on this part first. So Jess, I'll start with you.
I'm good. No questions for right now.
Okay, Noemi?
Well, actually, can I,
Go ahead, Jess.
yep, I had to think of one question. What do we do with the money that we save? Like if we're not going to spend money on transportation or some other things, what are we doing with that money?
I'm not sure yet because we haven't really gone down that road at this point because we do anticipate spending the money. So I am sure that if we ever come to those crossroads, we will have to come back to you and present to you what we will be spending the money on, if not on transportation. But I don't think we've crossed that path quite yet.
Okay. All right. And I know we have plenty of things we would want to spend it on. It doesn't go away though.
It does not, but that is funded by the city. It's not something that necessarily is funded by us. So I think the mayor wanted to chime in on that.
Yeah, Mayor, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the Chapter 70 money, we have 2 years to spend, if I'm not wrong on that. And then the money comes from the city. If encumbered, then we don't have to worry about losing it. It doesn't get put in the general fund. But if it doesn't get encumbered, then it definitely goes to the general fund and we have to next year. Or we need to send it down to the council to get a specific batch of that money appropriated to a special account that doesn't end. But that's why knowing how much we have to reappropriate, how much we have to see spending, we do that all before the end of the year closing happens, so that any money that we want to put in a special account can be done that way.
Great. Thanks, Mayor. Noemi, any questions?
No, I don't have any questions at this point. Thank you.
Okay, great. Pat?
Yes, just one. The out of district, are students attending classes out of district currently? Are programs going on throughout the state?
There are programs going on that we are still funding for out of district students.
Okay, thank you.
Definitely, yes.
Great. Mayor, any additional questions at this time? Okay. Marcelo, I have one. I just want to make sure I understand. So the 9.3 original budget, that's what we budgeted for the full year of transportation, correct? Mm-hmm. And so we've uncovered 7.6 million, assuming we'll have some transportation expenses, but when I look at that, I don't know, the roughly 60%, 70-ish%, little less of the total budget has been encumbered. So do we anticipate, I mean, just like looking it out, I know we'll spend some money, but I guess when do you anticipate, given that we're already in October and we probably won't, at the earliest bring students back, at least for several weeks at the earliest. I mean, we'll talk about that later, but So yeah, I guess when would you anticipate for the board to be able to know if we're going to have any savings that we need to think about how, the district is going to reallocate?
So I think that we would have to wait and see once the year is a little bit more determined. I think things have been, the encumbrance was really truly based off of us going through the hybrid model, because the encumbrances happened in July and we all know a lot happened in the month of August and a lot continues to happen. So that's kind of difficult for us to answer until we have a definitive course for the year.
Got it. So thank you for that. So let me make sure I ask this question, make sure I understand. So the 9.3, is that what and I don't have the budget that we approved, the budget book, is that the number we approved in our budget, or is that like a hybrid? Because when we approved the budget, I don't think we did assuming hybrid. We just approved it as, sort of a regular school year, which obviously it's not.
Yep.
So what is that number, the 9.3?
So the 9.3 is the amount of money we budgeted and approved through the budget process last spring.
Okay.
The 7.6 was what was anticipated to be an expense given the hybrid model that we were intending to go with in July.
Got it.
So, and even the 7.6, it wasn't really to carry us through the year. It's just with literal known information at that point in time, which could have changed, as you know, throughout the year, depending on any given number of variables. So, there's kids that move, there's all sorts of things that affect, the routes for transportation. So we would have definitely kept an eye on this number, especially with this year being as dynamic as it's been.
Got it. Yep. And I think I understand the mayor's point. Mayor, I'll come to you in a second. Understanding the mayor's point that like some of these funds, once encumbered, obviously we don't lose them. And I guess just wanted to make sure, I'm clear. First of all, and all of us are clear on the rules, because I'm okay with, obviously, if we're going to underspend in transportation, which I assume we will, I guess I'd love to figure out how to reinvest those dollars, and I'd be looking to the district, to sort of put forward how they would suggest that. And then the other thing I think related is I'd also be open to a conversation of, we don't know what the next budget cycle will look like. And so to the degree that, I want to make sure we're supporting the kids to the extent possible. And so if we have money to reinvest this year, let's do it. And if there's money to save and we want to and are able to put it for next year. I mean, I know it's only October, but already thinking into next year, I want to make sure that we do that, because I just don't know what that budget picture will look like.
Absolutely. And I think that the direction of where we would be able to go with the transportation funding, we'd have to collaborate with the mayor on, because, transportation, as you all know, is an expense of the city. So it would be something.
Mayor, I know you wanted to get in there as well. You're on mute, Mayor.
Just a couple things. First, encumbered isn't spent. So I want people to know that. So we could end up encumbering more, which means we need to spend more. But the transportation is tricky because we have contracts. There was some state laws that were passed in order to allow districts to pay for services they did not get. Didn't say districts had to pay those contracts for services they didn't get. But we're in the middle of a conversation with that vendor and the superintendent and her staff to do that. We're going to be held to the letter of the contract, so we're going to spend some money even though we don't get the service. But the larger thing I wanted to say was the budget mode is we have a fully funded 2020 fiscal year budget. We should spend like we don't know what we're going to get in 2021. And so that's spend lightly, save tons. We don't know what's next. And that's across all the things. And that's what we're doing on our side. So at the end of the year, by the way, December is halfway through the fiscal year. So we're not that, it's not, we usually start talking about FY 2021 probably in January. So it's not uncertain that we have these discussions now. It's not too early, I should say. But that's my thinking about it, and I think we're going to fight to ensure that we spend the least, save the most, prepare for the unknown, even though the state said that they're going to give us all of the Chapter 70 dollars we expect plus, because it's not only just what we got, but plus money. No one knows what next year's going to look like.
Yep. Great. Thank you, Mayor. And Maciel, can you remind me, when do we typically encumber, you may have said this, but the salaries? I know we've only encumbered some, but when does that typically happen?
Sure. So in a typical year, salaries actually do get encumbered in October because usually at that point is when the funding for the new grants start.
Yep.
And also hiring kind of hits a bit of a lull. I have been in communication quite a bit, as you can imagine, obviously, with our payroll department, just to make sure of when the right time is to do that, given how different this year has been. So we're planning on actually encumbering with the first payroll in November. So it'll definitely happen for the next time that you get a financial update, though. So the next time you have a financial update, there will be an encumbrance of payroll. Whether I have an asterisk and more to speak to in regards to that encumbrance or not is still to be seen, and depending on where we are with it. But I'll definitely keep you updated on where we are with payroll encumbrances.
Great. Okay, I think so. Why don't we move on, and then we'll probably have other questions, Marcelo.
Sure. So the next thing I want to discuss with you is the additional grant funding we received today, and I'm going to stop sharing because I believe this slide popped up from someone else earlier.
I can share it, Marcelo, if you'd like.
Thank you.
Oh, there it is.
So we did receive 3 new grants related to helping the district with COVID expenses that we all anticipate. We received about $10.3 million additional, broken out into these 3 grants that you see in front of you right now. One of them is the Remote Learning Essentials. The other one is the Coronavirus Relief Fund, and then the CARES Act. The Remote Learning Essentials, we've used it primarily to be able to provide hotspots. We've had to do some network upgrades that this has been able to help us facilitate, and then also keep funding for devices. As you can imagine, we have to keep providing devices to our families and our newcomers. We also have the Coronavirus Relief Fund. Now, this is a grant that we received that has to be expended and encumbered and expended by December 30th. And we've been using it towards custodial overtime. The 10 days of professional development that we did at the beginning of the year was covered by this grant. And then we've had to do a significant amount of supplies this year. And we've been able to support our schools with those expenses, which are much higher than they normally anticipate them being. And then we've also used it towards paying for part of the year's lease for St. Mary's, which is the space we leased to help us with the spacing due to the new COVID regulations. And then we also received the CARES Act funding, which all of you are very aware of and familiar with. And that has helped us do a lot of things. We've been able to provide additional instructional support, which has looked like we've been able to allow each school to hire an additional BCBA, hire an additional BPE, which has been a great help. We've also been able to start to discuss high needs targeted interventions with this funding. And of course, there's money in here for stipends and also custodial overtime. The stipends have primarily gone towards being able to have a family tech liaison. So there is somebody at the school level who has the ability to work with our families and make sure we engage them and make sure they're able to log into the platforms that they have at the disposal from the schools. And then there's, of course, the proportionate share that we have to do with the CARES Act money for other schools within the city of Lawrence.
Great. Let me go the opposite direction. So, Mayor, any questions on this part?
Outside of the some of the contracts we may have with vendors, do we have any staff that's laid off?
No, I mean, not that I'm aware of. I don't know if Cynthia, you want to chime in on this, but I believe we have not furloughed or laid anyone off at all.
No, we've maintained our staffing, which is incredibly important as students require the additional supports.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, just checking. That's all I got.
Great. Pat?
Just a question on devices, and maybe the superintendent might want to speak on this later with the remote learning. Are we at a point that we could say that 90% of our families have devices, 100% of our families have devices? Are we at that point that we're certain that families have exactly what they need to access the remote learning?
We do, Pat. All of our students, I should say, have devices, and we continue to swap and fix and troubleshoot devices, but all of our students have devices.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Noemi?
No, I don't have any questions right now.
Great. Jess?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if you guys could provide a little more detail on some of the high needs targeted interventions. And I'm thinking particularly for our special education students, just because I do know that the remote learning experience has been extremely challenging for that group. And so I'd love to know some of the specifics about what we're doing to support them during that time, this time.
Sure, I can jump in here, Maciel, and I'll let my colleagues jump in. But one of the things that we did was add additional BCBAs to our teaching staff. And those are staff members who have incredible skills with respect to social, emotional, and behavioral supports for our students in this period of both trauma and uncertainty. And then, you know, we continue to think about the other big position is BBEs. These are building-based educators. They're also additional support staff for the same reasons, to be able to create small groups, to be able to cover a teacher when they're working with someone else, to be able to cover each other when they're doing professional development. So those are two of the positions that are specific to working with students in this time.
And those are being assigned like to classrooms that have special needs, special education students in them, so that they can provide like one-on-one support for those students?
These are positions that are, each school decides how to best use it, and it could be for any student, including students with high needs.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I mean, yes, thank you for now.
And thanks, Jess. I have one question, and I know we have CBI ready to present in a few minutes, so be mindful of that. But can we talk a little bit about the family tech liaisons? Like, I'd love to hear a little bit more about that role, and is it in every school, a few schools? Who are those folks? Were they already employed, or is that a new role? Sorry, a lot of questions. Love to hear a little bit more about them.
Sure. So it's a stipend position for someone who already works in the school. And it's, I'll let Cynthia take over for the remainder of that part.
Yeah, of course. So they are a current employee. It's an additional stipend, as Maciel mentioned, and their role is to troubleshoot anything technology-wise for families. So they're basically on call when families need the additional support with their Chromebooks or how to log on Zoom, anything related to this remote platform right now. They're the point person, not the only person, but the point person.
And how many of those folks do we have throughout the district?
We have one in each building.
Okay.
Yes.
Great. And they're available, or the expectations that they're available throughout the day, like families can just call them as needed.
Correct.
Okay, that's great. Okay, I'm good for now. I think the only thing I would say, related to this, and I think Jess does have a follow-up question in a second, but the only thing I would say is that I really appreciate this, Maciel. I mean, really sort of thinking that Q1, ended in September. And so I appreciate, sort of this update. And as I've, I think, mentioned to the board, at our next meeting, we'll be reviewing committee assignments, including what's currently the budget committee, which typically just meets to review the budget and prepare for the budget, which, takes up half the fiscal year. But I would like that group also to really be working with you, Maciel, and just, in these quarterly updates and just making sure that, they're engaged, and if they have questions, and then they can help, present the information back with you to the board. But I really appreciate the report, that you presented. So Jess, I'll turn one more question from you, and then we are going to hand it back to the superintendent, because we have our friends from CBI the house doctors. Is that what we call them? School doctors?
That's right. That's
who are
right.
gonna present.
House
So
doctors.
Jess?
Yeah. So I guess it's more of a comment, but I just want to suggest, because I know that we all understand and are focused on getting that it's best, especially for the special education students, if we could return to in-person, and we know that's not safe right now, et cetera, but we also know that's the goal. I would strongly suggest, and I don't know, maybe Mary can speak to this, but I think it would be really good to gather a broad range of feedback from the parents of special ed students about what their experience has been with the remote learning and what kinds of, and I don't think there's a simple or easy answer to this, but just to get a sense from them of what support might be most helpful from that for them in helping those students learn and not lose. Yeah, I mean, I know we're concerned about that for all students, but I think it's been a particular challenge with the special education students. And I know, several parents who are basically just by their kids' side all day, trying to help and support the teaching process, and then also having to work and, and do have other family obligations. And it's draining, and as hard as teachers and other educators try, the remote process is really difficult to do special education over. And so I think we've got to all put our heads together and get some more feedback from parents about where we should be investing some of these kinds of funds, if in order to better support those students in the learning process.
Sure, we're happy to bring that back to you the next time we meet.
Great. Marcel, thank you. Superintendent Rohani, back over to you.
Great, thank you. So as you'd mentioned, we do have CBI with us today, so welcome. And tonight we're going to hear from them as to where we are with the analysis of our buildings, to include the first 7, and then short summary about moving forward and the other 14 buildings. So I'm going to turn this over to Mike. I think Mike is going to be with us for the next 30 minutes. Go ahead, Mike, if you could just share with us what we've done so far, a summary of what the findings are or recommendations moving forward, and then the timeline for the next 14 buildings.
Terrific. Thank you, Superintendent. Again, my name is Michael Teller. I'm an architect. We are, CBI Consulting is your, quote, house doctor. That means we have an open contract with the city to do a variety of projects. You may know that we've done projects for fire stations. We're working on the library. We're doing Museum Square Garage. And we've been working for the city for about the last 2 years. There's never a shortage of things to do. We're especially pleased to help out the school department in this particular endeavor, which has to do with evaluating the HVAC of all the schools. We've broken down this project into 2 phases. The first phase we're calling phase 1, uniquely phase 1, are the larger schools, because the larger schools are newer and they actually have ventilation systems. Okay, so the first challenge is they're so big, getting to view and evaluate all the different pieces of equipment in the building took a lot of time. But also because it already had ventilation, we wanted to make sure it was working, not working, and how we could evaluate that in terms of your needs. The 7 schools are Partham, Arlington, Lawrence High School, Weatherby, Gilmet, South Lawrence East, and Frost. And most of those buildings are built within the last 20 plus years. Although I think one of them was, I think Frost was built in '85, and though we probably look and think of it as a new school, it's 35 years old now. So interestingly enough, these HVAC units last about 20 years. That's about their lifespan, and that's what we would think about. So for example, the Lawrence High School, the big one, was completed in 2007. So those are only about 13 years old, they got another 7 years of lifespan on them. Whereas again, on the I think it was the Frost, we just got a call to look at a boiler replacement on that, and that's 35 years old. So there's a life expectancy on a lot of this equipment that's the part A and B of phase one. So for phase one and phase two, phase one, we're looking at the larger schools. Phase two, we're going to look at the 14 smaller and older schools. Some of them do not have any ventilation at all, except to open the windows or to use the unit ventilators, which are the heating units that exist underneath the windows in each classroom, okay? And they all have a vent to the outside, and sometimes that's enough, and sometimes it's not. So we've just sent the reports for phase one to our cost estimator. So we're about 2 weeks away from completing those reports. And Superintendent, you asked last week when we were on the call when we were going to start phase two. We're actually going to start getting out to the site this coming week. This ahead of schedule because the engineers can do the field work while the rest of the report is happening. So that's going to accelerate the process, which is good. And we're working with Chris Merlino to prioritize the phase two schools into which ones are do the largest ones first to get the most bang for the buck. So so that we'll evaluate those first. Our HVAC engineer has looked at each of the 7 of the largest schools and done a report. Right now, the Lawrence High School report is 19 pages. They've looked at every piece of equipment and how big it is and how much ventilation there exists, the capacity for each unit, which relates to different parts of the school. There are many, many units in that building. It's a huge, huge school. And I think there's 187 unit ventilators in the building as well. But because there are, again, because it's only 13 years old, they're still within their normal lifespan. There's a lot of maintenance that has to be done on these units. And that's an ongoing process that Chris and his team are challenged with, because so many buildings in the area are trying to call the same technicians for maintenance as well. So it's a challenge to keep everything up to speed. In terms of ventilation, most of these 7 schools have enough ventilation to meet the code. And that's really where we start with these projects. At the beginning, we were asked, is it safe to come back to these buildings? And I want to be clear to everyone on the call that safe isn't a word that we use, okay? Because it's impossible for anyone to say it's safe. What we can say is it meets the requirement of the various codes that are associated with buildings and with schools. And in the 7 largest buildings, in general, there is sufficient ventilation. It meets the code. If, for example, you took a classroom that could normally have 20 children and you reduced it to 10, well, then you'd have double the amount of ventilation, if that makes sense. And then through this large report, there are a number of recommendations, and I'm going to cut right to the chase and talk about those. Even though there's enough ventilation, and again, enough is subjective, even though the ventilation meets the code, there are additional steps that you can do as a school department to improve the quality within the schools, okay? So for example, running the units on what we call continuous occupied mode, basically running the ventilation all the time, will improve the ventilation and the quality of the air within the space because there's more fresh air coming in every day, every hour. That will result in more energy costs, but I think we're less concerned about that right now than for the health of our kids. Replacing the filters is also a huge item. Now, the school department does that on a regular basis. We're recommending a higher level, a better quality filter in terms of the tightness of the mesh, the the designation in the industry is called MERV. Don't ask me what that means, but a MERV 8 catches less things than a MERV 13. So we're asking and we're suggesting that all the filters be improved to a MERV 13. There are MERV 20s. They are much finer mesh. The problem is your equipment in general is not designed for that higher mesh. It would actually burn out the motors. So that's not really recommended. So we're improving the system. We're actually catching more particulates in the filters. They're not designed to catch viruses, for example. That's not how efficient these are, but they're better. Okay. We're suggesting that we run the toilet exhausts 24 hours. Now that doesn't always happen in the buildings. They're not set for that. Again, most of the HVAC systems are set for energy efficiency. And we want to change that now to run for more ventilation. That's the key, more fresh air. We want to, again, adjust all the units for the highest percentage of outdoor air possible. We want to locate occupants from areas that don't have ventilation. Most of these newer buildings have ventilation in every room. Use operable windows when the temperatures are reasonable enough to do that. And Superintendent, we had a conversation about that. You know, if it gets too cold in the classroom, it's too much outside air, and it's not conducive to the learning environment. So you can only have so much outside air when it's too cold or too hot. But when it's in between, let in as much outside air as you can. Keep the conference room doors open. Common spaces, keep them open to promote that airflow. And really, we want to reduce traffic within the school so that we're not mixing. Really want to stay put. We're actually creating these little pods of people so that we're not mixing, so that in case there is COVID, you don't spread it. What else? And again, we're going to get, this is going to be more important to the 14 smaller schools that have less ventilation. Adding HEPA filters. Now, HEPA is, you've heard that term, that's a very high level, that's about the highest level filtration you can get. And you can get portable units to put in the classrooms to improve the air quality when you have less ventilation. If we had to open the windows, Superintendent, and it was too cool, you could bring in portable heaters as well. So there's another way to improve that and still keep fresh air coming in from the outside. And ultimately, we would install ultraviolet lights in the ductwork. Now that's a very long-term, down the road thing. And if you could get the ultraviolet lights today, which you can't because the demand is so high, it still is a much higher level of recommendation for the scale of your schools, that we can't implement that right away, right now. More importantly, they're just not available. So that would be the ultimate fix, because ultraviolet light does kill viruses. So right now, the good news is the 7 largest schools actually have the ventilation that meets the code, that would be correct for each one of those buildings. And for the most part, they're working effectively. Wherever unit ventilators are not working, you want to make sure they are, and make sure that from a maintenance standpoint, everything is up to speed. That's pretty much it in a nutshell for the 7 largest schools. Does that make sense? If people have any questions on that?
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, we'll go around and have board members ask questions. Just why don't we start with you, and we'll go down the list.
I'm good for now.
Great. Noemi?
Yes, I do have some questions. Thank you for the explanation of how the ventilation works in the building. And as I was listening to the different options, almost all of them require the intake of air from the outside to the inside, obviously to increase the ventilation. And And, you know, when the winter times is here, the temperature outside is -10, trying to figure out how feasible would that be? Because, you know, you on one side you have to have the ventilation, on the other hand, you have to try to figure out how you keep the buildings warm, and even the potential emission of the small units that you will have to put on windows and so forth, that I will imagine that can increase pollution of the air in other ways. Like, have you guys, I mean, I'm just trying to figure out how would that work.
So
Small heaters, for example, and so forth.
So it's a great question. I want to be clear that the recommendation to open windows is in addition to the fact that you have ventilation and the current ventilation meets the code and is correct.
Yes.
If you can make it better by opening windows, then it's just better. Everything that you do is better. If you put a HEPA filter in every classroom, it would be better. But that's above and beyond having ventilation. In the 14 smaller schools, you do not have that same mechanical ventilation that you have from these units. They're different systems. So in those classrooms, we might start talking about having the windows open a little bit more. But you can't make it so cold that the kids are not comfortable.
Yeah.
So it's a balance.
Okay.
You do the best you can.
Yes. So okay. So now I understand better. So all those additional recommendations, they're all above and beyond what is the standard right now, where we already up to code.
Correct.
And those could potentially be what is needed in the other buildings in order for them to be there at the level of these ones that are already up to code, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
And as I said, we haven't gone to phase 2 yet. Those are going to present their own unique challenges. Okay.
Thanks.
Great. Pat?
Yes, thank you, Mike, for this explanation. We've become engineers, I guess. I just have a question about the filters. You're suggesting that we have a MERV 13 in those 7 buildings. How available are those filters in light of the fact that probably every school across the nation is seeking those filters? Any idea?
I'm actually going to ask Chris to jump in because I know he's buying them.
Hi, Pat. Hi, Mike. Hi, everybody. So, Pat, the lead time for those filters are approximately 2 more weeks. We should be receiving those within the next 2 weeks. We have procured them and we have them purchased. The lead time was 4 to 6 weeks. So we're about 2 weeks out from the 6-week mark. We've ordered them about a month ago. So
No.
we're looking good. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, but did you order a sufficient amount for those 7 larger buildings?
Yes. Yeah, we took the orders from previous years with the regular filters that we purchased, and we multiply that times the 7 schools. Yes, we have.
Okay, thank you.
You're very welcome.
Great. Mayor Rura?
Did you find in this any multi-million-dollar projects that are necessary to meet code?
In the
I
7,
know you're waiting on some of the pricing.
yeah, I don't have that. What we're going to give you with the cost estimate is the life cycle the life cycle estimates that we have to replace units that are over 20 years old. So you'll have a capital needs assessment of when those units are going to be 20 years old and how much it would be to replace each one of them. And we all know that they're all not going to fail in 20 years. But it's prudent to plan, especially for these larger schools, that you can phase in those units when you can. And it's also good to know, big picture, how much it would be to do the whole school. So we'll be getting you those costs. But right now, no, we haven't found that for the 7 largest schools, because they're on the newer side, it's not the same level of expense to replace units or update units that that you might find on the older schools.
And you know, the kind of rule that I use is if it breaks and no one's surprised, we should probably fix it.
Mhm.
And we've been trying to do that. So that it would last 20 years and it's going to last maybe another 20. In those last 5 years, everyone should be looking to figure out how to fix it because it might break sooner and no one will be surprised.
Right. So the key is also these units, no one keeps these units in stock anymore. Nothing is off the shelf. So if you did have one break, it would be 30 to 90 days before you could get one to replace it. So being proactive about it and understanding that age consideration is important.
The other piece of it is the idea of a classroom in either the 7 or the 14 other schools. The rules around this is basically about, you know, full classroom, right? And some of the classrooms that we have are, let's just say that for all intents and purposes, we don't always meet the lowest level of population in the classroom. And so I guess all the stuff you talked about, opening a window, using the systems, you know, that stuff is on top of the fact that we're going to have to, because of rules by DESE, social distance anyway in the classroom, right? So that brings the bar even further down for, you know, the need for air to circulate and all that, because you're not going to have 35 kids in a classroom. They won't let us do 35 kids in a classroom because of social distancing. Is that right?
That's correct. And our analysis was, even if you maxed out the classroom at 30 or so students, that the ventilation is per the code. If you take it down to 15, you have double the amount of ventilation. So it's even better. Less need to implement all those other additional requirements, recommendations.
And there are small, the mitigation things that you talked about are small mitigation efforts, like the HEPA filters, and the MERVs. Those are things that, you know, we're going to buy off the shelf and can do for every classroom, and except for the lead time, will also impact the air quality and circulation. Yeah.
Correct.
I say all that stuff is because I just, you know, we do have a problem with the infrastructure in the city. I mean, we knew that from before the time that the receivership happened, and so there are going to be knowns about, especially in the 14, that we just don't have an HVAC system in some of these schools, but that we have to get to fixing them, and we've done that with the MSBA's accelerated repair program, and that's how we got a new boiler at the high school and a roof at the high school, those types of things. But for the record, they don't do air conditioners, and so and then we do the HVAC system. We're gonna have to make sure we leave that stuff out. And I mention all that because that stuff is time. And so if we want to be in person, you know, let's say something crazy happens and we're going to be in person, 100% in person in May or June, you know, it's not like we're not going to go in full time because we don't have a full new brand new HVAC at the Hennessy, let's call it. We're going to find mitigating we're going to find mitigating action to do, and try to get and meet those the level of air need, the air need inside a classroom as best we can. I just want to set expectations around that.
I have about 10 more minutes, so.
Thanks.
Yep.
Yep, thank you. Julio, I'm going to go to you, and then I think Noemi may have a follow-up question, but let's go to Julio.
I'm all set, thank you.
Great. Noemi, you can ask your follow-up question.
Yes, my follow-up question is based on the answer that was given to the mayor. We're talking about the being up to code even if we have a class full of students. So my question is has the code changed after the pandemic, or does it still the same in terms of air quality? Like meaning like so the question is like, has the what is considered up to code for ventilation, has it changed because of COVID, or is it still the same? And is that being in consideration, the transmission of the disease and so forth?
It's a great question. The code has not changed. There's not a new COVID code.
Mm-hmm.
It is it's the building code,
Mm-hmm. Okay.
and it's based on a certain level of health that
Mm-hmm.
they've determined, and there's always a safety factor that's in there. It's not the minimum. It's also not the maximum. It's an average. And that's the best that I can tell you right now. It's a good question. There is no COVID code, but all these additional recommendations help improve the quality of the air. If there's more air flowing, if we keep the units on all the time, you're going to have more ventilation, more air is going to be moving out. Whatever's in the air is going to be moving out. And that's what we want. The social distancing is great, not mixing more than you need to inside the building, less time in elevators, that's also an issue. So I don't know if that answers your question, but there's no new code for that.
It does. Thank you.
Yep. Great, and I'll ask a few questions just as follow-up.
Sure.
So Mike, I think just to this question of airflow, first of all, thank you for your presentation. For me, it kind of confirms when we spoke, when you spoke in front of the board maybe a month and a half ago. I mean, for me, it just kind of confirms what you all were saying or anticipating then, especially with these 7 buildings. I guess my question with airflow, I mean, while the building code regulations haven't changed, my understanding is that sort of the guidance around airflow and sort of the measures of that, what if I remember from the last presentation is that if our buildings are up to code, like they're meeting the recommended airflow sort of percentage. I don't even know what the right technical term is, though. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so from the standpoint of, again, if our buildings are up to code, which these 7 seem to be meeting that, then we're meeting the recommended airflow, sort of outputs for that are put out from different groups.
Right. It's fresh air.
Yep.
It's fresh air that comes in, and air changes
right
per minute per hour. So
great. I guess my being short on time, my only other question then is in terms of timeline for the 14. Now I understand you're even still working on the report for these first 7, but I think what I'm most concerned or sort of curious about is your initial assessment of the buildings and how quickly that information gets to the district to start working on mitigation even before the final report is done. Like I think we don't need to wait for the final report. Obviously you all have a lot of information you generate and share with the district. Can you give us a sense of the timeline for these 14? Again, not for the completion of the report so much as when you're going to be able to start giving specific sort of information to the district around mitigation for these other 14.
Again, we are going to prioritize the 14 of the largest to the smallest. The 14 aren't nearly as big as the larger schools, so they can potentially they could look at them faster, but it's a little more complicated because there's no single system. That being said, if there's no system, then that's pretty easy too. So I think within 2 or 3 weeks, we should be able to get back on a call with you. The engineers are very, very, very knowledgeable, and they're a quick study on these types of things. And we should be able to give you a verbal, in 2 or 3 weeks after they do their site work, which is going to, they start next week, it might be 2 weeks worth of time on site. And I don't know, again, if it's going to take them 2 weeks to get through all 14 schools, or we just do the largest ones. I remember, I think it was last week, Superintendent, we were saying Tarbox was so small, we can wait till the end because there's so few students there. Let's focus on the larger ones so we get the most bang for our buck here, or we get the most effective implementation as soon as we can. So that's what we'll try to do. But I can commit to getting on a call with you 2 or 3 weeks after they've been to the site to really start to give you some some feedback.
I appreciate it, Mike. And again, like, I know, so it sounds like they'll be on the ground a couple weeks-ish, and I understand that it's not could be longer, but obviously we'd prefer the 2-week timeline. And then after that, it sounds like a couple weeks after that. So we're looking, in the best case scenario, about a month where we could be, with you sort of hearing detailed not detailed, but, information around mitigation strategies and things like that. And I would just ask, like, in the interim, I know you communicate with the superintendent and with Chris. And so I guess from my vantage point, like, as the information becomes available and you all are sharing it with the district and they can start working on those, that's better for me than waiting for all 14 to have to be concluded, and then working on those. So, again, I'll leave it to you all to work out the details. I'm actually leaving here with feeling a little bit better about the timeline, just that, it's aggressive, but I think the sooner the better. Obviously, all of our, for the most part, we're remote right now, so it's not an issue right now, but I think, whenever we are ready to have staff and students, all back in the building, we just want to make sure that this part of the work, which is critical, because we do want to make sure that, the buildings have enough airflow for, again, meeting the recommendations. So appreciate anything you can do and your team can do, just to push forward and get the district the information they need. So thank you. I really appreciate your work and appreciate your time today.
My pleasure. Nice to see you all.
Thank you, Mike.
Okay, good night.
All right, Superintendent, I'll hand it back over to you.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to share my screen.
Superintendent, just as you're doing this, again, I just want to pause on this where, again, I appreciate the update. And again, what I'm hearing is they're starting to work on the other 14. I don't know if you said this week or this coming week. And it sounds like, to the degree possible, working with Chris, I would urge, like, as they're getting information about buildings, they should be transmitting that to you all. We don't have to wait, so if we know there are things in 2 buildings next week that, are mitigation strategies that we can move on, like, I'd say let's go ahead and do it. But I'm leaving at least this meeting feeling like, okay, it could be 4 weeks till we're in front of, with Mike again, him giving us sort of an analysis of the 14 buildings. And if I know you all can get that information sooner, it makes me feel better about the timeline, to ensure that all the buildings meet the airflow requirements and, it's not like months and months. So I'm feeling better, but I just want to keep the pressure on them and you all to get, the information you need, to work on anything that is needed.
Yeah, of course. Happy to be in touch as soon as we get additional information, and we'll be in close communication with them in terms of their timeline and progress. Absolutely. So the rest of the presentation includes an update on where we are today with attendance, remote request, enrollment, and just also a summary of the current delivery of our remote learning. So as you all know, last week, in collaboration with city officials, DESE, our school principals, and other stakeholders, including, of course, the leadership team, we made the decision based on the current city rates of infection to go fully remote with staff. Of course, our students are already remote. So we started that this past Monday. We have kept 2 buildings open for our staff who have a preference to work in the buildings for whatever reasons, including having a quiet space, some privacy, connectivity issues. And we have a few staff members who have taken that opportunity right now. So they are in the high school and they're also at the Gilmet complex in those 2 buildings. What we know right now is that since we have been back since September the 19th, we have had 23 staff members test positive for COVID, and a parent report of 39 students who have tested positive. The student reports, again, are parent reports, so they would usually call the teacher or the principal and let them know my student is home sick with COVID. With respect to the staff cases, our protocol is that the staff member communicates with their supervisor. Their supervisor communicates directly with our Director of Health Services, and then contact tracing begins. In that contact tracing, that includes everybody in the -6 feet close contact with or without mask. Personal phone calls are made, communications sent to the larger community for the building or pod, or depending on the scenario of that. We've had, so I'll pause there if there are any questions with those two slides.
Let's start the end of the alphabet back up. So Julio, start with you.
Do we have any idea how the staff members that got tested positive acquired the COVID? Was it in the school buildings or was it outside of there?
Yeah, thank you for your question. So what we know is that the majority of these cases were from outside. We do have 2 instances where there was a pod of staff members that got it from each other. And we revisit our protocols, of course, but the bulk of these were not contracted, I should say, in our school buildings.
And if I may, are these staff members from within the city of Lawrence, or are these staff members from other communities?
Both.
Do we know, is it half from here or half from there? Do we have a number? How many people from Lawrence?
I would say they're in the minority.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mayor Rivera.
I don't, but I just to add some information to that about what the pieces that are the last 100. We did a report of the people who've gotten it from Lawrence citywide. The last 311 cases, people that got it at work were about 79 people, but there was 10 of them are healthcare, 7 from carpooling. So we haven't gotten any school sightings I should say that differently. The work is not a major part of where people are getting it in the city of Lawrence. So follow that they're not really getting it at the schools either. However, daycare is popping up. We had 17 cases of the last 311 that were from daycare. But I don't have any questions.
Yep, thanks, Mayor. Pat?
Yes, I was going to ask a similar question that Julio asked about the contact tracing. I'm all set, thank you.
Great, Noemi?
The only question that I have is when in the slide that is right now that it says staff, I would assume that is also include teachers, or this is just non-instructional staff?
Both, yes, great question. So it does include non-instructional staff as well as teachers.
Okay, thank you. That's my only question.
Jess? I think that was a no, Jess. Okay, all right.
No, sorry.
Okay, no, I can
yeah, I'm good.
Okay, and yeah, I mean, I don't have any questions. I think, you know, and I've been in close contact with the superintendent in the district, you know, on these, and I also know that just Nancy, just again, like, been doing a lot of work on the contact tracing to make sure that you know, we're able to determine just you know, if people were in close contact or have folks contracted it. So Appreciate it. Superintendent, I'm just curious on the staff number. Do you have just a sense of sort of ballpark teachers versus other staff, just at a high level? Because I know we have people, and I think my question is this from, when is this data covered? Like, what's the time period that this data covers?
Yeah, this covers from the beginning of when we started school. And with respect to non-instructional and instructional staff, it's almost half and it's almost half.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. I'm all set, Superintendent, you can continue.
Great. So next we're going to have an attendance update. Here you have attendance from last week up until this week. The number below is what I shared with you the last time, and I just gave you what the difference is from this week. So it's a snapshot. We continue to work really closely with families and kids on engaging them for every single class, every single day. But pretty much just maintaining. I'll move forward and then we'll pause for questions. And then I'm going to have Denise jump in here for an enrollment update.
Hi, good evening, everyone. So as you can see, we're probably in the same boat as many communities in the sense that our enrollment is down in public schools. We are down from this time last year, 547 students. We took a look. One thing I want to caution is that you cannot look at this chart and look at first grade last year and first grade this year, because the first grade cohort last year is now in second grade. Last year's second graders are now in third grade, et cetera. So you kind of have to look from diagonally from left to right. But I can do some of the math here for you. Our largest declines are in preschool and kindergarten, where, or I should say, unanticipated declines are in preschool and kindergarten. Those declines total just over half of the overall decline, representing 275 students, with some assumption that if our programs are half day and remote, then for some folks, they want to keep their kids in the childcare programs that they're already in, or just keep them home for now. So, we can anticipate some changes as we change from remote to hybrid or in person at some point. The other big decrease is at 8th grade. This is typical, however, or mostly typical. I'm sure some of the parochial options that are in person may, be slightly increased, but, we have many of our students enroll in the VOC, and so you'll see that happen here. We can look at homeschooling. We looked at those numbers. They're up 30%, but it's not a huge number. It's 24 to 35 this year. And then you can look at each grade and see, where it's either stayed the same or may have shifted, 10 or 20 students per grade level. And that pretty much gets us to our totals for last year over this year. The only thing I would say, but I don't predict it to be much different, is that last year's numbers are based on the October 1 SIMS report. And this year's numbers, we have not completed that report. That's not finalized yet. We did get a delay in the deadline for that. So that will be later this month. And where we started school a little bit later, there might be some small bump, but overall, this is pretty much where we're at.
Thanks, Denise. We can take questions from this slide or the previous slide.
All right, we'll start with Jess.
Can we just go back to the previous slide first? So that's up. Okay. So just to clarify, and you guys can't see my mouse, but this third line of the table, the one that has, that's the change from like the Monday of the previous week
This is from 2 weeks ago.
or from 2 weeks ago?
Yeah, yeah.
So 2 weeks, like at the very end of September, that last Monday in September, there was the same attendance, but like these other, it's just comparing it to the same days of the week, but 2 weeks prior.
Correct. Correct. Yep.
All right. Okay. So we are seeing attendance go down somewhat, is what we're saying. It's not that, so we're saying that 88, like 2 weeks ago,
Oops,
it
sorry.
was 2 weeks ago, it was 91% on whatever that date was, September 30th. And on October 2nd, it was 91%. And on October 9th, October 4th or 3rd or 4th, it was 92%. Is that, I just want to make sure I'm reading it correctly.
That's right. And I would not categorize this as attendance going down. I think it's fluctuating day by day. So to compare it, the comparison might not be fair, but because it fluctuates day by day.
Okay.
So we have, right. So, we can do every single day and compare it. And this is just against that one snapshot. And I thought it would be important to share it because when we met last time, that's what I shared with you all.
Okay, gotcha.
So it's a slight change, and that varies, and there's many reasons why that's varying right now between 3% and 5%.
Okay, and so I guess what would probably be good, and maybe like this is very granular at this point, and I know we're going to drive you crazy, Cynthia, with like our changing requests for different different ways of viewing the data. And I don't mind seeing it like this. It's a great level of detail. As we go forward through the semester, it might be good to have just like a weekly average that we're looking at, because then we can kind of see what the trend is over time, right?
Sure.
Like, because if we're seeing it just continue to fluctuate within this like 88 to 92% range, fine. But if it's seeing like the weekly average go from like 91% to 89% to 87% or something, then that would be more of a cause for concern.
Sure.
Okay, that in terms of how we monitor it. So I don't have further questions on this right now because I don't think we have enough data to, kind of spot trends and see, but I'm wondering if you have any, like, are you seeing it's some of the same reasons that we've been talking about for this fluctuation in attendance? What are we seeing as some of the reasons why attendance is fluctuating like this?
Yeah, one thing that we have noted in the past 2 weeks is that we have many more families that need childcare in the form of supervision for our older children and younger students. And so students are now living temporarily with another family, and it's harder for them to be connected for many reasons. So lots of our families are reaching out to friends and families in the DR, further south, in another state. And so students are now being connecting in a less reliable connectivity place, like the Dominican Republic, as an example.
Well, sorry, and they're doing that because they have to work, and and they need the extra support in child supervision and care.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So we're working with families right now on that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Can we go to the next slide for a minute? So I'm curious, do we think like the big number in the because numbers are sort of stable or even going up slightly in some of the other grades. Do we think the big disruption in the pre-K and K enrollment is just that with things basically starting, like having been remote to end the spring and starting remote in the fall, that there are families that are just basically not bothering to enroll their children in preschool or kindergarten because it seems like it's not even a transition, or it's a weird transition, or they're, those families, especially if this is their first child to go into school, are like, it's particularly challenging to navigate all of this, getting a device, et cetera, for the first time when they haven't even been connected to a school in the first place? Or what do we think's going on there?
Yeah, I'll have Denise jump in here, but one of the things that we've mentioned before is the challenge of the half-day preschool, because they also need full-time care, and our home daycares in particular are very good at accommodating our families where our students can be cared for all day.
Yeah, I think piggybacking on that, you have families who, let's just say, we're using childcare, and I don't want to mention any particular childcare by name, but let's just say they're using childcare system Y, and Y has been working really well for the families. They want to enroll with LPS, but then childcare system Y doesn't have people on staff who are going to guide their children through a different curriculum, right? So it doesn't make sense for them to try to be enrolled in both places. They're just going to maintain their full day, all day program slot for another year. And then I think for families, as you mentioned, Jess, who have not yet enrolled in Lawrence Public Schools, it's overwhelming to think about taking on remote learning, being responsible for it. Even if it was in person, you're thinking about the 2.5 hours, for kindergarten, and we're normally full day for kindergarten. There are just a lot of challenges that people are weighing out their own work schedules, their abilities, maybe just as you said, they don't have a relationship already with us, and the whole thing seems daunting, so they're just holding back. And I think that we're going to see them come when they know what our plans are, for the long term, or when we return to in person.
No, thank you. All of that makes sense. I don't have any other questions right now.
Thanks.
Great, thanks, Noemi.
I only have one. I actually have one comment and one question. And the comment refers to the enrollment update for 8th grade. And I remember last year when we were looking at the numbers, one of the things that was mentioned was that we usually see a change in the preschool and then again in the 8th grade. Because here we're comparing the change from one year to the next, but looking at sideways. It probably will be a good idea for us to see in percentage that, for example, in the 8th grade, let's put it as an example. Let's say that it's always 15%. That we see each year that is compared to the changes on the year before is not different, because I suspect that probably in some of those numbers, beyond the overall being seeing a drop, in those areas where we already knew that there is always a change, probably the change is not as big. Would you have you seen those numbers?
We haven't dug back to 2018-19 or before that, but your suggestion is a good one, and we can take a look at that. Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's not that I want you to be, killing yourself with numbers, but looking at sideways doesn't really tell us that much about the trend, because you already know that we're always going to have that drop in 8th grade. Yep. It's a matter of figuring out if the drop each year is similar. Mm-hmm. And then the other question, and I don't know if that would be for you or for somebody else, is that as we see a drop in enrollment of about 547 kids, how will that affect the allocation for the school district, for the budget? Does that have any effect?
Sure, as you know, we're funded per student, so we will continue to monitor this and then see how that does affect our funding.
And do you think that will affect the impact on the budget will be significant enough that we'll have to do revisions to the budget? Is that too early to say anything about that?
Yeah, you're right. I think it is a little early, but we'll be sure to come back to you all with any significant changes on that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Pat.
Yes, the decrease in enrollment, I think you said it was 547 students. Does that number include the no-shows from a couple of weeks ago? Do we now know where these kids are?
Yeah, Pat. So the no-shows, there were some kids included there that were in the middle of unenrolling, and the no-shows remain enrolled. They were an issue of getting connected on a daily basis versus not being enrolled.
So is there still a number of kids that we still don't know what they're doing? Or
No,
where
we
they're
do. We do.
You lost me there with your, I'm
Sure.
sorry.
Yeah, the number of students that we reported 2 weeks ago that were still not fully connected were for one reason or another. Some of them were in transition to be unenrolled, and some of them were just issues of technology, connectivity, desire not to be in the remote setting. So those were the other reasons, not specific to just being enrolled or unenrolled.
Okay, so that number has no impact on this 547.
There may be a couple kids in there. Yes, there may be.
Right. I mean, this enrollment report is current as of last night. So you know, they've been unenrolled. If they were unenrolled through the last couple of weeks, they show up here.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Great, Mayor Rivera.
Yeah, I just to go to something that was brought up about the budget. Enrollment doesn't impact this current fiscal year, right? It impacts the next fiscal year.
Correct.
So if we fall short on it, we have to build our budget off of the end of year report, whatever we make up, because that's what this is going to pay us for, right?
Right.
And just a form thing, the attendance chart, the previous one. Can we just get dates? If the bottom ones are comparing to a different set of dates, I honestly was reading this wrong. I thought it was, you know, the percentage differences from either the day before or something else. I wasn't really sure what it was saying. So if we can add the dates that the no changes from, if it's 2 weeks ago, whatever date that date was, and it was a Monday or Tuesday, would be incredibly helpful. And then also compared to last year. Because I think something that was very informative was, you know, we're like beating up about 90% and 92%. And then we realize really that has been our historic attendance rate. You know, it changes the conversation. And so knowing that at 10/13, it was 89% attendance. And 2 weeks ago, it was 89%. But a year ago, it was 85%. That's helpful. Or 95%, you know, whatever it was. At least we'll have a sense of the historical. And again, just 1 year is enough. I don't want to get crazy about it, but it tells us a story that I think is being told here, which is we're holding the line week to week. And I think there's a bigger story to be told what we did against last year. So if you could do that, be great.
Sure.
Thanks.
Thank you. Julio?
Thank you. I just have a question regarding, actually two questions, because most of the others have been answered based on questions previously made. Do we have, has the district had conversations with both the parents and students regarding the outcome of the students not attending class? What the
Sure.
consequences will be?
Sure. So we've had clear expectations for students and families. And families have shared with us some of the challenges in engaging a lot of our teenagers or older students. So yes, they are clear on the expectations and impact that attendance has on both their learning, but more and their grades. So that has been shared with both students and families.
And is that, could could there be a situation where the students, because of the way that um, that last year, the end of last year, everybody pretty much was passed, basically saying, okay, we're not going to hold you back because of due to the circumstances. Do you think that this might be the expectation that even if I don't attend, the school district will do the same thing that happened during the end of the school year last year?
I don't think so. We've been very clear that attendance matters. We've been clear that homework matters. We've been clear that we're teaching new material. We're using our curriculum and teaching to the standards. So I think teachers have done an excellent job, and administrators, in communicating that message that this is very different than what happened during our emergency closure.
And pertaining to some of the enrollment, one of the things that we discussed at one of the meetings, one of the last meetings that I attended, was the challenges of some of the younger children, let's say in daycare, where they were not they were not able to be taught remotely. And one of the suggestions was to perhaps reach out to some of the high school students and see if any of them would be willing to be hired. And I know that the mayor indicated that the city had some funds that they could pay some of these students to help out in terms of assisting families that needed help in connecting with for remote learning. Was any of that able to be done, or was that even considered?
The mayor has offered opportunities for us to do work study, and the high school team is now working out a proposal. Our goal is to keep our high schoolers in school during the school day, but there are other opportunities for high schoolers to engage with families, both at the high school and students and across the district. So yes, that is in the works.
That is in the works. And do we have a time frame for that? For that plan to be even put into place?
They're working on it as we speak. I can let the mayor speak on a timeline, and he's directly connected to the high school team.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that I could report back on is that student that was calling in from her job is now working for us and not working there during school. And part of working for us is she has to be a she has to show up to school and be a full attendance that day in order to work for us. So that's done, that one person. But the model that is being rolled out. My goal is 100 students, and the goal is to get them in and paid and working so that they could be in school learning for a full attendance. But they said we were looking for December, January rollout, and I said no, we got to do it sooner. And so the official meeting is either Friday or Monday of this week or Monday of next week, where they're going to nail down the fine points. But in the end, we'll have the goal is to have 100 students do work study, which means you have to be in school full time, and then whatever time you're out of school, you could give to help either doing outreach in the field, outreach on the phone. We do a lot of care calls to elderly people. Hey, are you okay? Do you need food? And also doing contact tracing for ISD, not in-person contact tracing, on the phone contact tracing. Even with a little neat thing, and I don't know if we rolled this out, we told the superintendent this, we're gonna give the students a device, either a phone so they can use for a hotspot, and they can make the calls off of, so they'll have a device that allows them to, they can use during the daytime to go to school too.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think it's that's excellent news, and I'm happy to hear that this is going to be, that this is in the works rather sooner than later. And I'm also very happy to hear that that student that was working and taking classes out of her closet is now working for the system. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and then board members have others. I think it's fine. I think, again, a lot of the questions I've had have been asked. I think one that hasn't is, you know, in many ways, I could anticipate the pre-K and K decrease in enrollment, you know, for all the things you've talked about. 8th grade seems to be, you know, it's a transition year. But when I look at our current 11th graders, that's about 100 kids. I mean, that's a pretty large percentage of that previous 9th grade class, or 10th grade class, rather. All the other grades, when I look at 4th through 8th, actually numbers are stable or increasing, you know? And again, pre-K I can understand, and kindergarten, but what do we think is happening there? I mean, that's 100 kids, you know, from last year's 10th grade to this year's 11th. Do we have any sense? And again, the current seniors are much higher than last year's 11th graders, so that's good to see. But what do we think might be happening there?
I think we probably need to go back and do a little bit more of an assessment around what's happened there. It's an anomaly, I think, and you're right that we need to go back and dig a little deeper and look at where those kids are. And, you know, I might have said some portion was due to retention, but we didn't do that last year. So, and, you know, we have to look at where and if they've transferred out and to where, but it is an anomaly to have that many in one grade that is not a transition grade, for sure.
Yeah, because I mean, I anticipate, and, you know, obviously I work at the department, but if I take that hat off for a second, of, you know, like, you know, I think, you know, as the chair of this board, I mean, you know, working with everyone here, we'll be seeking some guidance around, like, I anticipate, and I don't have this data in front of me, but I would anticipate that the pre-K and kindergarten, like the decreases in Lawrence, were probably not unique. You know, like I would assume that families are making that choice given just the year that we're in. And that accounts for, you know, 275, like that's, you know, a lot of students. So I don't know what the department will be doing just to account for that, you know, because again, if we're going to be building budgets off this year's number, this seems to me an anomaly, you know, for this year that can be explained. And so that I'll be very curious about. And I think I'm also wondering, and I don't know how to account for this, but families that, you know, either are out of the country, like I wonder if there's any percentage there that is, you know, chose not to enroll, or families that, again, didn't enroll that typically would for other reasons. So there are a lot of factors here. Again, that 10th to 11th grade really stood out because that's 100, and it's a big percentage of the 547. But again, the pre-K to K, and I'm happy to try to dig and get some more information around what is it, an understandable drop in enrollment in these grades, just how that might factor in for things like budgeting purposes for next year, when we would anticipate that those families will indeed choose to enroll, you know, their students in the Lawrence Public Schools. So I guess it's more of a comment, but the question was with that 10th and 11th, and would love to get, you know, anything you have there in the future. And I think the other thing I just want to underscore, maybe two things. One is, I think Jess said this, anything that we can do, and the mayor said this, like just comparing, I think for the purposes of the board, like it's important given the unique situation to have sort of the detail day by day, but I am really interested in the weekly and the monthly compared to historic, you know, previous years, things like that. So that'll help us, I think, as a board, just kind of see trends and patterns. And then you all can fill in the details when things are, if they're different or off, and, you know, in terms of what you all are doing. And then the other thing I would say is, for future meetings, I would love to think about how to just get more maybe examples of how the remote learning model works in different schools. Like I would imagine, just given the autonomy, like schools are doing it differently, but I would love to better understand, and we can just pick a school or teams to think about, for a 4th grade student in this school, like what does their day actually look like? How long are they with a teacher in front of the screen? How long are they doing independent work? It just would be helpful to, I think, for me and probably the board members to have just a slice of what that looks like, the day-to-day. And I would say for different levels, I'd say for elementary, middle, high school, just because I think that's a piece that, at least I'll speak for myself, like I'm not as clear on right now. And I know that having some examples will just help me, be able to ask questions and kind of understand the experience of our students, our families, our staff. So I'll just put that out there as a request, and we can follow up, Superintendent, on that. So
I would second that.
great. I will, Superintendent, pass it back over here. I think there is another question though.
Sure.
Pat, I think you had another question.
Sure, thank you. And Ventura, that's a wonderful idea. I third it. Thanks, Jess. Superintendent, I was wondering about assessment of the kids. A couple of weeks ago, we talked and you said that it was ongoing. I think the board would be, I would be, and the board too, would be very interesting to see what the assessment piece, what the kids, how they look at this point. And, have we fallen behind from last year? I think that's an important piece to look at right now. And if possible, if for the next meeting or the following meeting, if we could have some assessment results with some comparisons, I think that would be great to look at.
Sure, I've noted your request and we'll be happy to come back to you all with that information.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. Superintendent, is there more to your report?
Yes. Okay. So next, we wanted to give you an update on the remote work request. And so here are the numbers. I have Maricel Goris jump in here.
Hi, everyone. So as you could see here this week, we've had a total of 690 requests up to this point. We've increased since last time that we reported, and we have 529 approved, 114 not approved, 34 are pending. We're just closing up our MOU with the Administrators Association and soon to be the SEIU with some speech folks. We have additional information pending from 13 requests. So that brings us to a total of 690.
We can pause here and take questions if that's all right.
Well, let me just a clarifying question maybe. So these are applications, but I mean, as of last week, or maybe as of this week, pretty much all staff members are working remotely, correct? Can you just clarify that for us, please?
Yes, pretty much all staff members except for folks who are in custodial union, some non-instructional staff. Sorry about that. Non-instructional staff, custodians, some of our nutritional service staff and people, and safety.
Okay, so these are folks that, I know we have 2 buildings open where people can work if they choose to, teachers, I think, some staff. But we have all of our custodians, all of our safety, and all of our cafeteria workers are still working in person. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
We are working with them. We've been in conversations this week to support those that are non-instructional with ways that they too can be remote for a portion of their days between this time period for them to view and conduct professional development.
Great. Superintendent, how many more slides do you have? I'm just wondering if we should go through the whole presentation and then ask questions.
Yeah, we're good. This is it.
Okay. All right. Great. Well, and let me just say, because I already started asking the questions, so I don't typically do that, but I think those were most of my questions. I mean, I'm really just clarifying that for the most part, based on the letter, Superintendent, you sent, maybe if you could just clarify, Superintendent, like in terms of the most of staff working, like how long of a period, like when are you all reassessing? That would be helpful to just maybe remind the board.
Sure, absolutely. So we started with everyone back remote this Monday. We're going to be doing that for 3 weeks, and that gives us the 2-week period to reassess the data on November the 4th, the Wednesday. So we're looking at a 2-week period and then reassess. And again, we're going to do that in collaboration with city official, health officials, DESE, and our teams.
Great, thank you. And before I open it to questions, I mean, again, I having worked closely with you, Superintendent, your district team, and all the other partners, I mean, I think, this was the right decision. I mean, just looking at the data for the city, and I know you've been in contact with the mayor and sort of talking through all that. I think it's important to note, just as you shared earlier, with the number of cases and things like that, that this closure of some buildings or, having really staff able to work remotely was not done, at least from my vantage point, because of like issues that we were seeing in the schools, so much as to support, the overall city. I mean, I think the city, the numbers in the red, I mean, put us in a pretty unique situation. And so anything that we can do from the schools to support, those numbers coming down, I think is a really good idea. I do really just want to publicly also thank the staff that I know is currently also providing these essential services in person, meal services. I mean, as you talk about custodial staff, I mean, that is something that our families, as I think about the meals, specifically the numbers, Superintendent, that you presented last meeting, just the increase, that you all have been experiencing in meals to families. And so I'm really glad that we're able to maintain that. Not only glad, like it's critical that we maintain that, but we couldn't do that without the staff. So I just really publicly want to thank everyone who's doing that work to make sure that meals are ready, buildings are open for families to come and pick up meals. It's just, just a sincere thank you. I mean, I know that it's a huge need for the community. And so just want to thank those folks, publicly for that. So with that, let me open it up to board members. If there are any questions on the report, I will start with Julio.
Thank you. I'm a little slow here at this end, but I just have a couple of questions of either Maricel or the superintendent. The duration of these requests, these people who have requested the to work remotely, is this for the whole school year? And I'm basing this on what Ventura just asked, because if we're now going remotely, how come we're still accepting these types of petitions?
Julia, so I'll answer that.
I'm sorry, you're breaking up. We can't hear you. I'm sorry. I'm gonna try again. Sorry, if you're talking, we still
Give me 1 second. Let me.
Oh, got you back.
What about now?
There we go. Yep, sounds good. Sorry, we had you, but if you're speaking now, I can't hear. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, sorry about that.
Perfect.
So people are submitting in the MOU, we talked about remote work. Remote work up to in-person learning. And so once we got to in-person learning, or prior to arriving to the date of in-person learning, that's when we actually go through the tiers and invite staff back. At that point, of course, things would be a lot safer and so forth and so on as we make those decisions.
So basically that if we have to remain in the condition that we're working in now, these requests basically are now, in a sense, if we don't go back to in-person learning or teaching.
Sure. So everyone, everyone right now is remote. You're right, Julia. And when we're back in person, and especially when the students come back, then this is even more important to revisit these.
So if these people requested to work remotely, even though there were no students in the buildings, it doesn't seem to make sense to apply. I don't know if I'm being clear. I'm trying to put my thoughts together here. Because I would assume that these requests would make sense if people are working in person. But if people are not, then it doesn't make sense.
And Julia, if I could ask, maybe one of the questions I'm hearing, Julia, there is, I mean, have we, like, I know this is a summary to date of all the requests we've received. Have we seen requests come in like this week, you know, given that everyone's, for the most part, remote? Or is this just reporting, you know, since this became an option?
This is reporting since it became an option, but there has been an increase since the last meeting. I think the change is about 125.
But have those come after the district, you know, announced that for the most part, everyone was going to be remote?
So that announcement happened on Thursday. I don't have the information right now with the date stamps of how many since Thursday, but I can get you that information.
Okay, Ventura, thank you. I think that makes sense in terms of how you posted the question. My other question is, do we have a breakdown of the 680, 80 people, 90 people? How many are teaching staff, administrators? And you've already mentioned that there are some essential workers there, you know, besides the teachers and the administrators.
Correct. I could bring you that information at our next meeting.
Yeah, I think it's important for us to get that information and at these meetings, because that gives us a good idea of you know, how well the teaching staff is willing and able to come into work. Let's at the time when we decide to come into in-person teaching, which has been the biggest issue here.
Correct.
And I'm all set as far as that. I would appreciate a report for the next meeting.
Great, will do.
Thank you. Mayor?
I'm all set.
Thank you. Pat?
All set, thank you.
Noemi?
I do have one question. For the ones that were not approved, 114, what were the reasons for not approving the request to work from home? Is it because it didn't meet the standards that they were already set?
It was because either, number one, after several requests for the documentation, they never provided the documentation over a 6-week period.
Okay.
Number two, doctors wrote notes that basically stated that with practicing social distance, wearing masks and so forth, they should be fine to work.
Okay. But right now, you know, for the most part, people are working from home because of the announcement that was made on Thursday,
That's correct.
including the people in that group.
Yes, and also in the beginning of return to staff, September 16th, being that we had such a high rate of requests to have a remote work assignment, we gave temporary remote work assignments until we review the documentation.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Great, Jess?
So I guess my question is more around, yikes, sorry, trying to cook for children and do this at the same time. My question is more around, so we're on like a fully remote telework schedule now. Can we say, do we know that, are we basically going to stay on this until we can safely return to in-person learning? Or are we going to basically be retracing our steps and going back to a situation in which, you know, we're trying to just bring the high needs students back. We're trying to bring the teachers back into the building. Do you know what I mean? Like, because I feel like if we're going to do that, if we're going to retrace our steps and go back to that intermediate sort of step, then we're going to be having some of these same issues and fights rather than focusing on, like, how do we get back to a full in-person model and have it be safe to do so?
Sure. So the goal here is to bring high need students back. That's the next phase of this. And we will reassess that in 2 weeks with the expectation and goal to meet that, to be able to bring our high need students back, and then the match with the staff.
Okay. So if we're going to do that though, are we at the same time going to return to the requirement that everyone teach from the classroom, even if they're not teaching high need students?
Right, that's still part of the plan.
Okay, so this is basically just a temporary reprieve for everyone who's concerned about that teaching in the classroom thing.
This is a pause based on the city rates right now, yes.
Okay. All right, I guess we're just gonna, we're gonna see how this unfolds. So I don't have other questions right now.
Okay, thanks, Jess. And I guess I'll just make a comment, picking up where Jess is. I mean, I think the decision, you know, from the district was made, again, looking at the, just the data for the city. So I think as the district is reassessing, I mean, I think really the priority is getting high need students back, and then, you know, obviously the staff that we need to be working with those students. And then I know that there are other phases, you know, that as well that we're sort of aiming for to get kids back. So I think again, the focus on the data here, the citywide data, as we're also looking and finishing up work with CBI, you know, is important. But just to reiterate again, my sense is that the goal here is really we're at a place as a city to be able to then bring our high need students back, and that really is for me the priority. You know, to do that when we feel like it's safe to do so. I don't have one of my comments here. I think additional questions based on what was presented, but just want to thank you all for the information, you know, and the updates. And then again, for now, and really for the next couple of weeks at least, I mean, these requests, I mean, it's helpful to know. I'd be curious if we get more requests between now and the next week or two, but I'd be probably expecting that we probably won't, just because, again, most folks are working remotely anyway. So again, I would sort of focus energy on when it's able to review the data that comes out. You know, we have the weekly DPH data, and to the degree possible, like, when we're able to get high need students. I feel like that really is the priority, right now. So, all right, Superintendent, thank you.
You're welcome.
Appreciate the report. So going back to our agenda, sorry, let me pull that back up. So under my report, again, I had the summative evaluation, but I said that at the beginning of the meeting that I have, I'll be working to just finalize the summative report. I'll send it out to the board early next week. And at our next board meeting, we will both review and vote on the superintendent summative evaluation, and also an executive session. We'll discuss and finalize compensation for the superintendent for the current year we're in. So just to be clear, the year has started, but we'll want to vote on that as needed and make it retroactive to the start of the fiscal year. The other item I have is we are, we've started the year, and per our bylaws, we nominate a student board member, and that's meant to happen, right at the beginning of the school year. And so I would like to appoint a committee of Mayor Rivera, Jess, and Noemi, if they could work on just identifying a student board member. I will leave it up to you all to figure out the timeline. I think, especially in these times, having a student here with us would be wonderful, for their perspective. But I will leave it up to you all. And Jess, I will appoint you as chair of that committee. So if you wouldn't mind just organizing with Noemi and the mayor around, just the selection process and things like that. So if you'll, if it's not concluded next meeting, we at least would love an update just on what the process is, how it's playing out.
Just a question, Ventura.
Yep.
Last year when we did this, we had a list of potential candidates that the school provided us with. Is that going to happen again, or are we searching these young people out?
For sure, we're going to give you a list of nominations with their bios and their desire to be on the board for you all to consider.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And just, I said this as well when preparing for this meeting, and I said it earlier, but for other board members, rest assured, there are committee assignments. I'm trying to space out, because when we review next meeting, the committee assignments, I know we have a few others that I just want to make sure that, board members aren't overloaded, with committee membership, but just know that we'll talk about that at our next meeting as well. So thank you all for taking that on. I really appreciate it. And then the final item on the agenda is to approve the minutes of our last meeting of October 7th. Do I have a motion to approve them?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Second.
Great. Any discussion? All right, I'll do a roll call vote. Jess?
Yes.
Noemi?
Yes.
Pat?
Yes.
Mayor Rivera?
Yes.
Julia?
Staying.
And the chair votes yes. So those minutes are approved. So great. Okay, so as we're closing out, Mayor, let's say a few words.
Yeah, I know this discussion about the current state of infection in the city, and I think there's some general concern about a second wave coming on, and what that looks like for the city. If I could, I don't know if somebody could let me share. I'd share a chart with somebody. If you guys let me share, I could share with what the cases look like for us. Can somebody let me share?
Yep, I think they're going to work on that.
Got it. So, we had a pretty quiet summer, all things considered. All those people, we didn't get to 144 deaths just in this section back here. It has been, this was the first wave. But if you think about this line right around, 55 or 60, and you extrapolate that, it's been a pretty crappy couple weeks. And so that's what people are really concerned about. And what I would suggest is some of the information I saw today from leading public health people is that it looks bad here in the places where there's high spread, like Lawrence, but there is really no sense that there's going to be a second wave for the Commonwealth. That is not projected, at least not for the next 4 to 8 weeks. that the models are showing that it's going to continue. If we keep doing what we're doing at the very base level, that the places where the discipline is low, that you're going to continue to have considerable spread in that community. But as a Commonwealth, they're expecting not to see more spread. And so I don't know what the trigger mechanism is going to be to go back to the in classroom remote teaching. That that's something the superintendent, along with Desi and us, so we'll all have that discussion when it happens. But what it looks like for Lawrence is that it's not getting better anytime soon. This is like the 5th day of over 50 new cases a day. And so, we've done all the things that we could possibly think about to get the message to people, to do the basic things, stay home if they're sick, quarantine when they come back from traveling, at the test. We currently have three mobile units out there testing people in a city 6.7 square miles and 8 open lanes, almost 8 open lanes every day for people to get tested. So testing is not an issue. The issue is people just aren't being disciplined. They are partying and having celebrations, and it's not going to get any better with Thanksgiving and Noche Buena coming. People are just gonna celebrate, and then they're gonna have this impact. And the fact that our per day deaths are down, people are taking it less seriously. So that I don't foresee us getting out of the red anytime soon. We've been in the red since the beginning. And I don't know. The superintendent gave us the stat. I think it was 8 times the number we were when we first made the decision to go remote, to not go hybrid. So it makes no sense to have that wide of community spread in Lawrence and have people running around the community from outside the community. And so we are doing all that we can, but the thing that I wanted to do is, show you some information, but also tell you that if you want kids back in the classroom, folks have to get back to the discipline of wearing their masks, not having strangers in their house without masks, and not traveling without quarantining and taking the test. It does not look good. And so the second part of that, and having discussions with the superintendent, if you think kids are missing out because they're not live, you're definitely right. This in-person teaching is way different. The impact is a lot larger than this remote learning. And so our kids will be hurt the most. So it's not just that your kids aren't in school right now. It's just that your kids will be behind every other kid that has access to education in different ways that you don't because of the income in your house and the zip code on your mail. And so, I think that a way to mitigate that going forward when we get into a space where we're all safe, I threw this at the superintendent the other day, is that we should have to come back to school all year to get caught up. Whatever that costs, we got to pay teachers more. Let's do that. But there's no doubt that this is not just a public health crisis. This is going to be an education crisis for these kids. Because by the way, people who have resources are finding a way to teach their kids in pods. They're going to parochial school. They're going to all different type of things. The idea is we got to be prepared and be serious about this thing. I don't think we were as serious as we could have been with this virus, but we better be serious about educating these kids when we come back and paying for that. And even if we got to raise taxes here locally to pay for a full year school for these kids, because there's no way we can make it up short term. The last thing I want to leave on is I think that the school department is doing an incredible job. They're working their tails off. I think they are relentless in the things they're doing. I don't think that that's representative in the presentations we saw today. I think you guys are working way too hard to have some of us leave from this conversation and not think that you're not doing the best by the students. So I would encourage you guys to come with a presentation that clearly exhibits how you're interacting with parents, especially SPED parents, how you're interacting with kids with their devices. We used to make fun of all the videos we used to get about like student performances and stuff like that. But at least we knew you were doing stuff with kids and student performances, And so if Denise and her team are spending every day talking, what are the number of calls y'all took, and how many parents did you guys interact with today, and did you have a special distinguished student? the picture that was painted is light, and I know you guys are killing it because my phone's not ringing. When you guys are messing it up, my phone rings. Parents call me. School committee members call me. So I would encourage you guys to revisit your presentations to the board, because not only do we look at it, but I've been checking Facebook, and there's been a steady 115 people or more watching this whole time. And so I would encourage folks to do that. And I know that we have a new Eagle Tribune reporter, and I knew she was going to be on. So I would encourage you that, you know, the things we do and say on these things will also be publicized in the local press, because we haven't had a newspaper reporter for us. I'd hate for people to take away from this meeting that we are not, that you are not doing the most that you can do. And I know because I see the receipts, the invoices, and the Frau Borough and the way people are talking when we're in Zooms with people from the school department. I don't want people to take away that we aren't doing the best by the kids. We are failing the kids, but it has nothing to do with the workers of the school department. It's this crisis, and us continuing to be a red community. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay, so we've reached the end of the agenda. So at this point, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, Jess,
Yes.
Noemi,
Yes.
Pat,
Yes.
Mayor Rivera,
Yes.
Julia,
Yes.
and the chair votes yes. So thank you. We are now adjourned.